The early 90s were a wonderfully weird and creative time for games. A lot of this was due to the adoption of CD-ROM technology, bringing with it much larger games than cartridges had traditionally allowed. And thus the era of FMV games was born, providing work to aspiring actors across America. One of the most prolific developers for FMV titles was Digital Pictures. After rescuing Night Trap from the collapse of Hasbro's Nemo project and releasing it for the Mega CD, they were seen as pioneers leading the new genre. Whilst they'd released a lot of games during their lifespan, inevitably some would fall through the cracks. Citizen X was one such game. To understand why Citizen X was such an unusual game, it's important to give a bit of context. The game was developed by Digital Pictures, whose entire library to that point was predicated on the idea that FMV games were the way of the future. Their initial sales numbers backed up this assertion. What followed was a slew of titles full of grainy video, dubious performances, and a relative lack of gameplay. In fact, it was this reliance on FMV that ultimately led to their downfall, as the 3D gameplay of other modern titles quickly became more impressive than the stilted, limited nature of FMV games. With the market for their genre of specialization waning, Digital Pictures shut up shop in 1996. This is why Citizen X is so interesting, as it's really the only title featuring traditional gameplay that Digital Pictures even came close to releasing. In the same vein as cinematic platformers like Flashback and Prince of Persia, you control a highly animated character through a variety of slow-paced platforming challenges. After witnessing the death of an agent from a lethal dose of nerve gas, your character is unwittingly thrust into the midst of a terrorist plot. Citizen X was an ambitious attempt to marry high-end platforming action with FMV sequences. As a result, it was completely unlike the other games developed by Digital Pictures. Their other games focused almost entirely on the FMV, with the gameplay often boiling down to very simple button presses and Simon Says style events. In comparison, Citizen X is much more like other 16-bit cinematic platformers at its core. The FMV in this game is there to support the gameplay, not the other way around.
You! You're either here to wrestle a gator, or munch a sewer rat, or make some trouble. Don't make no difference, 'cause I'm here to kick some butt. Now beat it!
That's not to say there is nothing else unique about the way the game plays. In fact, there's an urgency imposed on the player that belies the usual slow-paced gameplay associated with cinematic platforms in general. You are only given 15 minutes to complete the entire game. Obviously, this is intended to up the stakes of the game, encouraging repeat playthroughs in a Groundhog Day-style time loop until the player learns the entire makeup of the game. Citizen X otherwise feels like other platformers in the same vein. Movement is sluggish, with your character jumping and accelerating in quite exaggerated ways. This is partially intentional in order to convey a more realistic, weighty style, but is also extremely clumsy, even in comparison to other similar games like Blackthorn. Trying to control your character feels like swimming through mud. Given the tight time frame allowed to the player, any minor miscalculations or lapses in concentration can lead to disaster due to the control scheme. The presentation is also a mixed bag. The animation of the main character and some of the enemies is quite good, as you'd hope from a cinematic platformer. The backgrounds are also nicely detailed, giving the impression of depth and a much larger world beyond the boundaries of the play space. Unfortunately, the game's colour palette can't quite keep up with the ambition of the artists. There is a huge amount of dithering, especially in the backgrounds, which get in the way of the admirable detail that the artists packed in. This is more apparent when playing the game on a modern display, But if you're lucky enough to be playing on a CRT, you won't have too many issues. More annoyingly, the game has a fairly dull overall look, involving a lot of greys and blues, possibly in an attempt to appear a bit more realistic. Even the best CRT in the world can't help with that problem. The game's overall style is very erratic. There are a lot of locations in the game, but they only last a screen or two before changing entirely. Enemy types are plentiful, but inconsistent, and don't always match up with the tone of the game's storyline. The whole thing feels like the result of a lot of work done by different people in isolation, then stitched together into a base game that was intended to be smoothed out later. Finally, it's impossible to talk about the game without at least discussing some of the FMVs. There were some embarrassing ones in the other Digital Pictures games, but Citizen X really takes the cake. Some of them are hilariously poor, nicely crossing over into the so bad it's good category.
I will keep you updated with any information that comes to us. In order to protect your identity, I'll codename you Citizen X.
Welcome to my kingdom, oh foolish one!
What do I see here? Ah, it is a Western maggot I shall pour salt upon. An amateur I shall spit upon as he wriggles to his death. Remember, to come after me is to die. Bye.
Digital Pictures never actually released Citizen X, as they shelved it a little while before the developer folded completely. The game was almost finished though, and was picked up by Good Deal Games for a release in 2002. They still call it a beta, but the game is playable from start to finish, and the only obvious missing feature is a short FMV involving a clown and some dynamite. This does not mean the game feels ready for release though. It is short, buggy, and in desperate need of polish. Don't start playing Citizen X expecting a hidden gem. If you do, you'll be sorely disappointed. Instead, look at it as a fascinating insight into a company struggling to meet the evolving tastes of the market. It's unusual to be able to play an unfinished game like this at all, let alone start to finish. It also has some interesting ideas. Perhaps if Digital Pictures had continued down this path, they may have evolved and survived as a result.
So where are you, coward? Maybe you got caught in the sewer like most rats do.
Or then again, maybe not.
Thanks, bub. Guess there is such a thing as a free lunch after all.